the topic for today is who's in charge. And, you know, that's a difficult thing to approach. I mean, it's a lot of times we don't formally discuss this. So, I mean, who's in charge of this podcast, Dave?
Yeah.
Who's in charge right now?
I think that would be both of us, the way that we kind of think and work together. Yeah, that so it'd be a shared leadership role between the two of us. Yes.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times that we have shared leadership, and I personally think that it's important to define what that shared leadership is. That and and I'm not sure how you approach that, but on the Tetra Prime team, we have different roles, and we have different competencies. So if if it comes to web design, I'm not in charge like that. Like I might be the owner of the company, but you definitely don't want me like overruling people that have higher expertise within a certain area. And then likewise, we also have different roles for like being a team leader or a creator or what we had traditionally called a product owner. And each one of those roles has its own responsibilities, and therefore you're kind of in charge of that element of the meeting. So,
Hmm.
like for example, the product owner is the person that you're creating for, and they have certain responsibilities that the other roles don't have. And then if you're a team leader, you're responsible for executing a well executed meeting. There are certain things that you need to do. You need to make sure that you prepare an agenda, that you're on time, that you open the meeting in a positive way that gets everyone's minds opened up and ready to work, and that you like manage your time effectively, and that you're parking things in places that they need to be parked in, as far as like our action items, to make sure that they're tracked and that they're getting done, and that you're closing out the meeting effectively. And that's like really those are executive level skills, and that's what the team leader is responsible for, is in charge of.
Hmm.
But the product owner has their own their own things that they're in charge of, that they often are the link between our company and the other stakeholders at the other company that we're interfacing with. So they have a lot of responsibility, and that they need to be a really good liaison. They need to be listening closely to what the other stakeholders within the company want, communicating that back to us. And if they get that wrong, then there's problems. We end up building something that the company as a whole doesn't want, and that rests on their shoulders. So they have to make sure that they're listening closely. They prioritize the work that's to get done, and
Hmm.
and sometimes you prioritize things in a way that is good, and sometimes you prioritize things in a way that you're not terribly happy with it. And then even the creators on the team, I think within a lot of companies, you'd think that that would be the least empowered position. You just sort of have to do what your job is. But within our company, our creators pull their own work items into the log, into the sprint backlog, and that demonstrates like their commitment to getting that work done. So they're pulling their own work items in there, and then they have systems for tracking their own work items, and making sure that that's delivered on time the next time, and reporting out in the sprint review that the work was done, and here's how the test went, or here's what the updates were. So it's a tricky question to answer,
Mm.
because like you were saying, there's just different roles, and different people are in charge of different things at different times. So I guess with all of that said, where are some of the major challenges that you run into with leadership, and knowing who's in charge and when and over what and all of that?
Well, I think with family businesses, it's incredibly unique and sometimes very muddy at the same time. There's a couple of businesses that come to my mind. One business, the father started the business, brought in his oldest daughter into the business, and now also has his son-in-law in the business as well, and when it comes to operational processes, the father is the go-to guy. He's People know that he's in charge. However, when there's an issue with his oldest daughter, he has he's almost like his conflict style, let's say, is just much different from a business standpoint, in contrast to a daughter standpoint, and so he struggles with holding her accountable for some of the behaviors that she exhibits within the business and amongst some of the other staff. He then, prior to connecting with me, he had hired an operations manager. But it would seem as if the operations manager, maybe similar to the dad, right, is only empowered for operational processes, not so much empowered with the oldest daughter. And so there's an issue of role responsibility. Well, exactly what that is, what's the clarity of her role within the family business, what are her responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, who's going to hold her accountable for that, and that's been really a quagmire for, first the dad didn't feel like he could do it, or maybe he didn't want to do it, and he hired an operations manager. But that operations manager, the unspoken rule is hands on with everybody except the older daughter. And so there needs to be, in my intervention is going to be to get to know both the daughter and the dad well enough, then to be able to have them come together as father daughter, but then also as workers, right? As the business owner, and I think that she used to be the vice president, and is no longer in that role. And then begin to talk a little bit about what each of their roles are, what he wants her role to be, and if she's okay with that role. And then to be able to set some standard of accountability of you're going to be answering directly to the operations manager, and I'm going to ask him to treat you just like he would any other employee of the business. They have about, I think, about 45 employees total. So can you see how that begins to get a little bit muddy?
Yeah, I absolutely can. Just thinking about the yeah, you and I had joked about this Seinfeld episode where
Mhm.
worlds collide, and I'm thinking about that right now. And
Yes.
I think that we tend to put certain areas of our life into certain boxes that we operate off of certain paradigms. So maybe within some area of your life that you maybe like say sports, that you tend to be like hyper competitive, really pushing, like just training super hard, very disciplined, heavy critiquing. You don't want any, you want very hard critiques. You don't need a lot of praise. I just need you to tell me how to get better because I'm out here to win. Maybe in your family life that you have a different paradigm for operating. That that maybe it's a little bit more caring and it's a little bit more um, has a bit more nuance in there in terms of not pushing too hard and sort of, a father's not a coach. You're trying to build a different kind of relationship, so you have a different way of thinking about that arrangement, and then you have something else that is business. So you have like these different paradigms that sort of come together, and
Mm.
navigating how you're going to manage that clash, I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it really kind of brings together the history of the family, the interactions. This case example that I gave a moment ago, I'm in the process of getting to know what their family history has been like, what their relationship with this dad and his oldest daughter's relationship was like prior to business. Just in the family setting, sometimes issues or dynamics will follow folks from their family. That family dynamic then comes right into the business. And so sometimes when I'm working with family businesses, we're working on business issues, right? And at the same time, we're working on family issues. This particular issue, or the set of particular issues with this company, is now is going the other direction, right? Some of the tension in the business now shows up at family gatherings. In fact, I talked with the family right after a family gathering, and it was unpleasant, and that's probably the kind way of saying it. It got a little bit ugly. And yeah, and that was due in large part to some of the tension from the business that is now coming back into the family. And so both affect the other, right? The family history affects the business dynamics, and then the business dynamics then affect the family dynamics as well. And so it can get very convoluted. So I want to take a look and assess what kind of relationship did this father and daughter have prior to her entering into the business, because I think he had the business even when she was a very young girl. And so to be able to assess that in some of my experience as a psychotherapist for 36 years and working so much with family dynamics is very helpful for me to begin to really assess and have an idea about what needs to be healed within the family dynamic. And then we shift over into the business dynamic once some of that healing happens. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes when we have healing amongst family members, some business issues tend to take care of themselves.
I think that this is a real, I don't know if in business you typically call it like a differentiating value proposition or like a competitive advantage. It, it is interesting though, the unique issues that family business owners face and your background in doing the therapy for so long and how interconnected all of those are for family businesses and how it makes things challenging. Um, I was just thinking about there was a case during, I train in jujitsu. So
Hmm.
during the pandemic, there was a famous team that they basically trained together, and then they lived in, I think it was maybe New York City, somewhere really big, where after practice was over, they would kind of go their own ways. And that was relatively stable, even with really big names, really big personalities. They would come together. They could they could cooperate for long enough to get practice through and get everything done and then go their separate ways. But when the pandemic happened, they shut everything down. You weren't allowed to be in close contact like that. So they just weren't allowed to train. So they had to make a decision whether they wanted where they were going to move, where they could train like that. And they decided to move to Puerto Rico. And so what happens when you move to a country where you don't know anyone, everyone becomes a lot closer
Mm.
all the time than just coming together for that brief period to get the work done and then to disperse. And it ended up causing really significant problems because they were living in close quarters. Um, not all family members live together, but there still are family events that people come together and you're around each other a whole lot more. And it ended up causing a fracture in that team
Mm.
just because of the way that those worlds were before they were able to stay apart, and because of the pandemic they were forced to move somewhere to where they became much more like a family unit and a training unit. And then once that happened, it caused all kinds of things to go awry, and they ended up splitting into two. Also, they're still well-known teams, but
Mm.
it just sort of reminds me of that in in a traditional work setting, you don't really have that. That you can sort of just find some people a little bit unpleasant to work with, but you just figure out a way to get it done for the 9 to 5, and then you have a whole different world that you can enter. But in family business, you can't leave that world behind. It follows you throughout your entire existence.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's just really interesting. You can in a routine employment scenario, you can come to care for, have affection for, or even love somebody that you might work with. But in a family situation, you love your family members prior to entering into the work situation, and that is amazing in so many ways. Right? Shared vision, shared goals, shared passion. The branding sometimes can be a little bit easier for families that work well together in terms of what we want our product or service to represent. So there's so many awesome things about being in a family business, and then there's some of these challenges that are then unique to family owned businesses as well.
How much of the challenge is associated with not having clarity on the boundaries? Because with us, we operate as a idea meritocracy.
Mm,
So we try to collect evidence that somebody is better at doing, where you're at as it relates to a specific area of the business. So we know more objectively that no, that's just definitively true. This person knows more than you about this
hmm
particular topic. So when somebody has uh, has a higher track record, a better track record than you within a certain area, you're supposed to have a certain level of respect for that and to not try to uh, even if you have a dominant personality style, even if you want to to insert yourself into that area, it is against our culture to do that. That's not acceptable behavior to insert yourself into an area where other people have a better track record than you. In our idea of meritocracy, because we collect metrics to determine objectively who's better at certain things, that
hmm
creates really clear boundaries. Other companies, they draw the lines a little bit differently. They have like job descriptions that create boundaries.
hmm
Um, so I'm just curious to hear from you what
Mm.
role clarity plays in conflict.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like to do early in the process is just a simple battery of tests to be able to get each player, each leader, each family member to take the Myers Briggs sorter, to be able to take the Enneagram. To add to that, the Clifton Strengths Finders, because sometimes we roll into get excited about launch family business, and sometimes due to finances, two or three family members wear all the hats. They don't necessarily wear the right hats; they wear all the hats. And so, by the time folks get to me, there's some need then for assessments for some clarity around what really is each person's area of passion and strength. And are they operating in a role with all the bullet points underneath that role in those roles? Do they aspire to work in a specific role but don't have the skill set yet to really be able to be in that role? Do they need leadership training or training within that specialty to be able to rise up and be competent in that particular role, to wear that particular hat? And so assessment is a super important thing. And then when you talk about an idea meritocracy, you're also it sounds to me like you're assessing in an ongoing way.
Yes.
And so that assessment stays fresh and clear for every person on your team. And I like that. And so assessment's a big part of it in terms of role clarity. In a lot of family business, in a traditional business, you come in, you're hired for a specific role with X number of responsibilities, right? In a family business, oftentimes that can be very convoluted and messy. And folks are wearing multiple hats oftentimes to start the business off. And then as it gets rolling, there can be conflict within those roles because we don't have clarity about what the roles are. We don't have
Hmm.
clarity about what the person's strengths or passions are as well.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're incorporating things like Myers Briggs and Strength Finders because what I was describing was a little bit more like just measuring your competency. But there is a
Yes.
difference between being competent at something and being like wired to do that thing.
Yes.
There are some people that are highly introverted, but they can do things like sales. Like they could be a phenomenal salesperson.
hmm
They could be really good at customer service, but it destroys them for like the rest of the day. It like drains a lot of energy out of them. So you got to find the intersection between what people's talents are, what talents they would like to have, and what they're actually wired to do.
Yes.
And finding that synergy is a huge part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and that really ties into what I've called the harmony model of personal transformation, which really starts out with discovery, a lot of that assessment stuff, and then attunement, the second step in the harmony model. In attunement, we're beginning to really shift and try on different things that may be a better fit for us than what we've previously done. And then congruence is that third step where we really start to get aligned with our talents, skills, and passions in some productive ways. And so that personal model is super important to me as I've worked with folks over many years, and it's highly applicable then to folks in family businesses as well.
This also reminds me of our conversation that we had last time about appreciating different roles. And I'm just thinking about the Strength Finders assessment, and there's certain there's certain personality types that tend to conflict with each other. So if you have one person that is real high in, say, harmony, and one person that is real high in competition, they have
Mm,
very different worldviews.
yes.
And it can become very easy for one of those worldviews to view the other one as wrong. And they're not wrong, they're just different and in a
Mm,
lot of ways complementary if they can learn to appreciate each other. If you have somebody that is just pure harmony and your business starts losing market share to a competitor, you need to have a competitor on your team that's willing
mm,
to stand up to that conflict or stand up to somebody moving in and taking market share, especially if they're doing it in a aggressive way. Otherwise, without a competitor, you may not have a business. But at the same
yes.
time, you have certain
Yes.
competitive personalities that are really assertive, really aggressive, and they can tend to rub people the wrong way because they
Hmm.
just they don't care much. I shouldn't say they don't care much about the relationships, but that's not their focus. Their focus is
Yes.
on winning. Their focus is on closing deals, making stuff happen. And sometimes in the process of being such a hard charging competitive person, you can damage relationships just because it's like a it's like it's sort of like the collateral damage that happens on the way to achieving their victory. So as you can see from those two examples, like we need both of those people on the team, but we need them to learn to appreciate each other.
Absolutely, and that really bridges off our conversation from last time, like you said. Yeah, and so the harmony person, you gave a nice picture of the competition individual, the kind of the good, bad, and the ugly of that the person that's built in that manner. And the harmony person is really about relationships, repair, the individual happiness of each of the employees, and those things are super important too. But in a situation where we're losing market share, right, just like you mentioned, and we may be at risk for losing business or going out of business, no matter how great those individual relationships are in the business, if the business is failing, we're in trouble. And so the harmony person has to then look to somebody like a competitor to be able to get that market share back, to bring the edge back to the organization, to be able to shine the brand in a spotlight that's important to do so. And so you're right. There's a super important need for folks that are built differently to understand better the other person. They understand the competitor really cares about this organization and the success of the organization. The harmony person does too, but their focuses are a little bit different, but both important at the same time.
It reminds me of Steve Jobs in his early years. He
Mm,
was very, he was dynamic, an amazing business person, extremely aggressive at achieving his goals, and he damaged a lot of relationships in those early years.
yes.
He was just dead set on getting things to where he wanted them. There's a lot to be admired about that, especially from somebody like me.
Hmm.
I'm attracted to that personality type. But Steve Jobs in his later years, he became much more attuned to the downsides of that type of personality. So
Yes.
when he owned Pixar, he would not attend certain meetings because he knew that his presence in those meetings would decrease like brainstorming and collaboration, that people would like yield to
Mm,
him when he didn't want them yielding to him because they had greater expertise in that area. They needed to come forward and speak. But just his presence in that room, because of how assertive and how aggressive he was, people would sit back and they wouldn't want to speak because they were afraid that, what an engagement with him might turn out to be.
mm,
So there was numerous examples of him removing himself from situations and toning things down a little bit to build and repair uh, relationships. And then I was also reading from Ed Catmull that Ed Catmull started to sort of appreciate Steve Jobs. And Ed Catmull's the CEO of Pixar, started to
mhm.
appreciate Steve Jobs because he started to view him as their guard dog, like that nobody would mess with them as long as Steve was around, because he would step
Yeah.
in, he would do the negotiation, he wouldn't allow anything bad to happen to them. He was kind of like the protector. So
Mm,
but that was a little bit later on in his career. So I think that
mhm.
the reason I point that example out is it's so hard to get outside of our own heads. It's
Yeah.
so hard that if you're a competitive person, you probably have a wall full of trophies and medals and stuff that you've won, and it's hard when you look at that wall to think that any other way is a better way of being. Like, this is the right way of being. And I'm sure Steve felt like that in his early years too. But as he became wiser, he realized the cost that had, and he had some significant public cost that happened to him.
Yes.
And hopefully, we can people can learn from others' examples and not have to not have to learn to appreciate alternate personality types and different roles the hard way. We don't want to learn it the way that Steve had to learn it.
But it's still fertile ground for learning, right? We don't usually make significant changes in our lives or our businesses until it really hurts. And so sometimes we have to be able to overstep boundaries and do things maybe based on our build in ways that are helpful, but in other times are damaging as well. And then it humbles us, right? And,
Yeah.
and I can relate to being humbled. I'm a driver and a pioneer and a go-getter and a big picture guy, and I know that at the very least in my previous business was intimidating. That idea of making space or room for somebody else to be able to have an opinion, to be assertive about that opinion, to be a part of the team in that way, that was a little bit difficult early in the process when I owned my first business. I got better as time went along, and we became a better team as a result of that, because it wasn't just my ideas any longer. It was a team of folks generating ideas and feeling then more comfortable to be able to bring those to the front.
I wish that you know I was struggling with the same challenge the other day, and because I practice jujitsu, but I'm also a coach, wrestling and jujitsu coach, and I was trying to think about how I can get people to have faith in their coach, because sometimes you try to teach somebody a thing that they can't fully grasp, but you're like,
Mm,
there's these 4 steps that I want you to take, and you just need to kind of trust me at this point. You'll see
mm,
why those things are important a few steps down the road, but they don't see it yet. So they just thinking from their own logic, they're like, no, I think you're wrong.
yeah.
And we have one situation where we'll have people that are white belts in the class, and we'll have a black belt that's teaching them, I want you to take these 4 steps, or I want you to do these things this way. And the white belt will like question the black belt in a way that they just want to disregard. Oh, they don't know what they're talking about. I only need these 2 things.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out, like, how do you get people to have faith in their teacher? Like, your teacher has been there. They have some really valuable things. They have the accolades. They have the years of experience. They have it. Just so, how do I get you to increase the amount of trust that you have in this person? Just do it on faith. They got the where they're at a certain way, and they have something to share with you. And unfortunately, sometimes the pain is necessary. Sometimes you just have to
Mm,
say, all right, if you only want those two things, if you think that that is sufficient, maybe that's as far as we're going to get. Just promise me when those two things, you start running into problems because those two things are not enough, that you're going to turn around and come back to me. That you're going to turn around and say, hey,
mm,
why is this not working the way that you described? And then we can revisit with those other two components that you thought were unimportant. And
yeah.
but sometimes people need to go out and they need to feel they need to try their own way, and even if that means failing and getting frustrated and angry that they can't seem to beat their opponent or they can't seem to do the thing effectively, and now they have the pain and frustration, they come back to the coach and now they listen to the other two components.
Yeah, they're humbled by their failure in a way that opens them up to the kind of feedback that they need. I think it goes both directions, though. I think as a leader, it's one of the things that's always been a hallmark of my leadership within business has been please uh, don't accept a thing that I say. Disagree with every single thing that you feel like you need to disagree with. I want to hear your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have years and years of experience in a leadership role running a family owned business? Absolutely. And sometimes folks can ask a question that turns my head upside down in the moment and makes me see things from a perspective that I hadn't seen from before. So it works both directions. Do the young pups or the other family members need to respect your authority and trust that authority? Absolutely. And the other part is old dogs learn new tricks all the time,
Yeah.
and I've learned at least as much from my employees over the years as I have taught them. So
I mean that's so well said. That especially when you're dealing with alternate personality types. And in this particular scenario, I'm thinking about in jiu-jitsu, there people are built differently physically, and will
mm,
also have different cognitive capacities. So maybe there is the possibility that the coach learned how to be extremely effective given their tool set, given you know what they were gifted with. But that might not be the right approach for this particular person because maybe they don't have those strengths. They have a different strengths profile and they need to, so they'll have to like listen closely to modify the way that they're coaching that person because it can't be done exactly, even no matter what level they reach themselves personally, the person
yes.
that they're training is not them. It's someone with different strengths.
Well, my kids taught me that lesson like really, really well. My kids are both very different kinds of human beings, and I think the some of the old traditional style of parenting, and we can also shift this over to family business dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some of the old style of parenting would be somebody who's proud and says, you know what, I raised four kids, and I'm proud to say that I raised them all exactly the same way. And today that doesn't fit the bill. Today we know, understand, and respect that our kids, each one, are different. They're full of all kinds of amazing qualities and strengths, natural abilities, and so forth. And each requires a different tool set as a parent, right? So with each child, we may have some overarching things that are consistent over time, but for each individual child, we employ a different tool set to be able to handle them, help them, nurture them, and help them grow.
That's why it's so hard to be a coach, so hard to be a
Mm,
leader, because you have to when you learn how to win yourself, you're learning how you are going to be
mm,
effective in the world. But then when you switch over to being a coach, you're not thinking about one, you're thinking about many, and you're not
yes.
thinking about many of the same kind, you're thinking many of different kinds. So then you got to figure out how to get all of this awesome diversity to harmonize and move forward together. And that's the I think that that's really the challenge. It's a very different mindset, and it's like another level that you have to bring yourself to in order to like step back and start viewing almost like rising above like
Mm.
your state of mind and seeing the bigger picture of what's going on here.
No, I think that boomerangs right back around in a beautiful way. Just this idea of understanding and assessing um, family members in business with you, assessing their personality, their temperament, their skill set, their passions, and to be able to then honor each one of those. I think a challenge for me as a coach in situations like this is that there are so many different dynamics. There are so many different individuals. Every individual is unique, but the flip side of that is I get super excited by diversity, and when I learn about something new about somebody, I get super energized around that. And so it provides tremendous variety in my work and in my life, and I like surrounding myself with all kinds of diversity. So we certainly see that with family-owned businesses.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. I
Mm,
think that that was a, I think that that wrapped back around. I really like that perspective of of diversity being a double-edged sword and how
hmm.
important diversity is. But with diversity means that we our communication game has to come up a level. You
That's
have
right.
to
That's right.
really listen to things that people have a hard time seeing, and that's why we have instruments like Myers-Briggs and instruments like Strength Finders, because it's easy to see the physical attributes. It's not so
Hmm.
easy to see the psychological nuances that people have.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you as well.